welcome back to the Tiny French Bacon for Dessert Week Technical.
Bakers, for your technical challenge of Dessert Week, we would like you to make floating islands. You have 90 minutes to make light, delicious desserts. On your marks, get set, bake.
Îles flottantes, or floating islands in English, are a total throwback for me. They are a classic lunchroom dessert in France where I grew up, and I used to eat them all the time. So I'm starting with an advantage because I know what the finished product is supposed to be. I'm reading the instruction that Ed edited for me, and I'm realizing we don't have a poaching pan. So that's an important tip for future. Always make sure you have the right equipment when you're starting a recipe. So, îles flottantes is meringues that are floating in crème anglaise, a very thin vanilla flavored custard. To make the crème anglaise, it's half part cream, half part whole milk, and some good quality vanilla paste, or if you have it, a vanilla bean. Vanilla beans are kind of hard to come by in North America. They were way easier to find in France. So by all means, if you have access to them, use that. So I started on low heat, warming up my liquid and measuring up my sugar in the meantime. The recipe that Ted provided me with is the recipe from Mary Berry, and I would mention that it is a little too sweet for my taste. I usually like a very sweet meringue. For this meringue, I passed my bowl with a little bit of lemon juice to make sure there was no grease on the side of the bowl that can prevent the egg whites from whipping properly. So I am separating my 6 eggs pretty carefully to make sure not any part of the yolk goes into the egg whites. Any trace of fat will prevent the eggs whipping nicely. So take your time and make sure to do it cleanly. Now, time to whip the eggs, and as every time I'm using the hand mixer, Franz is here! He loves whipped cream and always thinks that I'm whipping cream and wants to check it out. So just very gradually add the sugar to the meringue to not overwhelm it. Sugar is actually a stabilizer, so it will help your egg whites not separate, so you can whip them a little more aggressively. I like to have everything set up properly so I can move fast. When they're ready, add a hard peak. So what you just saw, that peak that was flopping over, that's a soft peak. And once the peak stays up, that's a hard peak. We're ready. So I used my finger and touched the side of the poaching liquid to see if it was at the right temperature. And I tasted it to make sure it was properly warm but not too hot. As per the instruction required, I have my 2 spoons in cold water, and I'm making quenelles out of meringue. At home, I would normally use an ice cream scooper and make dollops of meringue, not fancy quenelle shape. So to make the quenelle, you just sweep them back and forth with 2 equal-sized spoons that don't have a rounded top. The pointier the spoon, the easier it is to make the quenelle. And once you get the hang of it, it goes pretty fast. The recipe asks for 6 large meringues, and I made them the size that my pot would allow. Again, don't have the proper pot. And here is my first mistake. The poaching liquid was a little too hot, and my meringue will balloon a little too much. But it is my first time making it, I have no idea what I'm doing, and here I go checking them out. They look large but not too bad. They're not touching each other too much. I flip them, per directed, to make sure they're cooking evenly on each side. And this is where I should have lowered the temperature of my poaching liquid. But again, this was my first time making it. No idea what I was looking for. And you can see on that screen, they're poaching very, very fast. The meringue is even touching the top of the lid. And the problem with that is that if they cook too fast, they will deflate once taken out of the poaching liquid. And that is just sad that you worked so hard to create some air in that meringue just to have it disappear once they're out of the liquid. And yes, I noticed that they look way too big. Ted went to check it out and agreed that, yeah, they inflated way too much. But he doesn't help me during those videos or those recipes. The technical is very secret and it gives me no hint onto what I should be looking for. So I'm removing them out of the liquid into a drying rack, and they do keep their shape pretty well, so it was not too bad. If they had poached even at a higher temperature, they would crumble and not be able to pick them out of the liquid. And I decided to store them into the turned off oven to make sure there was no draft and they would not be banged and would deflate. It's just more of a safety measure. Here I am adding the sugar to my yolks for the crème anglaise. I do that last minute and make sure I whip them properly because sugar can quote-unquote burn egg yolks and create little curds. And I'm adding my warm-up cream, vanilla and milk progressively to my egg yolks, scraping any bits of vanilla that stayed to the bottom because that's where the flavor is. Whisking vigorously to prevent the formation of any curd on the egg yolks, and adding it back onto the pot at a very low temperature until ready. Crème anglaise is pretty easy to do. It's not thickened by anything, so there's no worry about cornstarch or flour. For the spun sugar, I had never done spun sugar before. I read carefully the instruction, but it didn't mention anything about sugar temperature, what it should look like when ready, so I was kind of going in blind. It just said to make a dry caramel, which is what I'm usually accustomed to in terms of caramel. You just put sugar on a pan and let it melt by itself. Don't add any water, don't touch it, let it be, and prepare your setup. Because it's my own kitchen and I don't want to scrub burnt sugar all over the countertops, I decided to grease the rolling pin and place it over a sill pad. Easy Cleanup is my middle name. I decided to check on the meringue and they deflated a bit. I felt like they looked like berets. And you just wait patiently for the sugar to melt. So keep an eye on it, don't go anywhere too far, but it will take a while for it to completely melt, and once it starts, all of the sugar will melt at once, and that's when you want to be careful that it doesn't burn. Checking on the custard as well. If it coats the side of a spoon and allows a mark, it's ready. Doesn't need to be any thicker than that. And my caramel is also ready. It's fully melted, has a golden color. And this is my second mistake. I think I should have let it cool a little bit before I tried the spun sugar. So you can see on this angle there is some kind of threads of sugar being created by the moving of the fork back and forth, but there's a lot of caramel drippage. So I tried to cool the sugar a little bit more. Again, the recipe did not specify any temperature I should be looking for, so I kind of went by my instincts. But I think I made mostly caramel shapes, then spun sugar. And when everything is ready, I will place it into nice bowls, but we do not own a big poaching serving dish, so I decided to make individual portions, putting the crème anglaise in the bowls and placing the meringues on top of them. They deflated a fair bit, and I was really afraid that they would not hold their shape while I took them out of the drying rack, but as you can see, they actually held together pretty well, and they are floating, so the floating island effect is achieved. So that meant they were pretty light and airy still. It's time to to gather our spun sugar that did not look like spun sugar, more like caramel, which, to be fair, is the way it is presented in France most of the time. You usually have a caramel syrup or little shards of caramel on top of a floating island, not spun sugar. Again, it's a cafeteria dessert most of the time. And it's time!
3, 2, 1. Baker, you are done!
And here are the pictures. It does look very elegant and kind of fancy for a recipe that only has 5 ingredients. The judging will be done by Theodore himself. Where is he? Oh, there he is. Like every technical recipe, because he's the only one who has actually watched the episode and know what we're looking for. He had never tried floating islands before, so he was pretty excited. He liked the look of it and said that it tasted really, really good. I was definitely judged on a curve because he loves custard and the vanilla flavor. Again, he had never tried it before, so he was really impressed. He liked it a lot. He did dock a point for the fact that there was no actual spun sugar, just caramel shards. However, he did like the caramel shards because they allowed for a little bit of texture difference. So you have the softness of the meringue, the custard vanilla sweetness of the crème anglaise, and the sweet sharpness of the caramel that also added some light bitterness, which is heavily needed because the custard is so sweet. He could not stop eating it. He really enjoyed it and gave me a score of 9 out of 10. Thanks, Theodore, for that generous rating. And thank you all for watching this episode. I know this is a very trying time and I will try to upload as much as possible because I'm confined at home like most of you. And I would advise you to cook for your family and your household. This recipe takes only milk, cream, vanilla, sugar, and eggs. And again, it is a pretty simple recipe. Stay close to each other in spirit and stay safe. Thanks again for watching. And all of the ingredient amounts and recipes can be found at thetinyfrenchbacon.com as usual. See you next week, hopefully, for the showstopper of Dessert Week. And here is a little bonus footage for those who stuck until the end.
Dun, dun, dun. Dun, 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 dun. It's the